Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the INTP stream. I I've been thinking about like government engineering lately, and how we can optimize systems, government systems, to create a better society and to make them serve their purposes more effectively. And it's a difficult task, and it's almost entirely theoretical because none of these optimizations will ever be accepted or implemented. But it's still interesting conceptually to think about, how we might rejigger, certain elements of our constitutional democracy and our government system to make it more effectively democratic, to make it more democratic. I'm regarding democracy as a value, and there are limitations with democracy as there are with republics. There are natural dangers that accompany systems that become, as they say in political theory, too democratic. I'm not really questioning the frame of democracy's validity. I think the validity of democracy is apparent, and I could get into other videos about why that's questioned. But in this country, we have a representative democracy and a constitutional democracy, right? So in some ways, the Constitution exists to constrain democracy, right? It exists to promote stability of law and precedent, and to protect rights specifically. But what ends up happening is that a constitutional democracy isn't really a democracy. It's almost an oxymoron, because the Constitution is a constraint on democratic will, and that inherently makes the Constitution an undemocratic object. It's still a necessary thing. I was talking with a friend about this. We have to preserve stability in rights protections, and protection of certain rights is extremely important and should not be subjected to democratic reevaluation through voting or anything like that. Obviously, we believe in the freedom of speech. That should be protected, the freedom of association, the right to privacy. All of these things seem to be incontestably valuable and good, and so it's difficult to do. But I was taking a hot shower, and I had this idea about, which is where some ideas happen at least. I had this idea, about what, how, to a certain extent, a constitution is a constraint upon democratic will, and thus it's an undemocratic object inherently. So, I just had that thought, and then I thought, well, how could we, how could we keep, the stability? I mean, so I had this idea of a perishability clause, right? That which addresses this issue of the incompatibility between constitution and democracy. And a perishability clause is essentially an expiration date on all constitutional and statutory law, that each statutory or constitutional law enacted is not eternal. It has a term limit, if you will. It has a perishability quality to it. It has an expiration date attached to it. And this ensures that the dead don't rule over the living, that the wills and judgments and preferences of some historical group at one particular time in power should then rule over a present society. And so what you would have essentially is, with all constitutional amendments, all constitutional edicts, all statutory laws have perishability clauses, automatic perishability clauses attached to them, or expiration dates, so that those laws are not eternal. They're continually being resubjected to democratic reevaluation to determine that they're still relevant in the modern day. And it's just a unique little engineering solution. I haven't really um, heard something like this proposed, but it would be an interesting way. But my friend raises this point, and it's a very good point. I'm thinking on the level of just innovation and novelty with respect to government engineering. And he's a different personality type, so he naturally will gravitate toward different considerations. It's immensely valuable then to discuss your ideas with others so that they could raise these points, because he raised the good point. Well, if let's say that constitutional rights amendments and constitutional rights edicts, rights related edicts and amendments, are they also perishable? Do they have expiration dates? Does the freedom of speech, does the law giving us freedom of speech have an expiration date? Is it perishable? Do we really want something so basic and fundamental to be subjected to the reevaluation of some future group, some future majority? That's an excellent point. And I think that my answer to that would be, I don't know. Because he fears that you'd have this corrupt group that would gain power, or a corrupt government would gain power, and then abolish these basic rights protections, freedom against race discrimination and sex discrimination, freedom of speech, the right to an abortion, bodily autonomy, the right to privacy, the freedom to association. He worries that if my innovation were implemented. Now, this is a very interesting point. I'm just thinking very TI right now. So would perishability clauses also be perishable? I think that that's an important point. Would the perishability clauses and the expiration dates also be perishable, right? And because you can see that if I'm saying that everything, that all statutory and constitutional precedent should be have these perishability clauses attached to them, these expiration dates. And at the point of the expiration date, you'd have to have whatever majority, Democratic majority, you'd have to have them, the state legislatures and the Congress decide. Obviously, the judiciary isn't involved here, and I don't think the executive should necessarily be either. Although we could have some sort of veto dynamic between the executive and when we're evaluating whether we want to either let a law expire or resuscitate it. But you can imagine, let's say that we attach these perishability clauses to these laws, and then the next cycle, let's say that all of these laws are subjected to, it's a logistical nightmare, really. And the idea is a theoretical innovation rather than some sort of logistical genius. It's still an interesting idea, and that's really all I'm trying to get at here, is to promote interesting ideas. But let's say that we attach these perishability clauses to all statutory and constitutional laws, and then once they're all subject to reevaluation, we apply those. But would the perishability clauses themselves and the doctrine of perishability, would those clauses also have expiration dates, and would they also be perishable, right? And I think ultimately, if we have a perishability, right, a perishability condition or a perishability clause attached to the perishability clauses themselves, what that would allow us to do is to so let's say that we have this, it's very complicated, right? It's a very complex idea. Let's say that we have a debate about the Second Amendment, and it's perishable now, right? But logistically, laws would have like expiration dates that would allow them to live like 20 years, Let's say that at the point we judge, okay, so the new majority deems that this amendment should expire, right? And so we let it expire, and then on a second vote, they state that, yeah, so we let it expire. Or let's say that we have some corrupt government arises that then, uh, um, you know, states that it has a vote about, there's no statutory law, like statutory law about relating to the right to abortion or something like that. Um, let's say there's some conservative majority dominating the country at that particular time, and they rule that right edict should expire and it's no longer going to continue. Well, if we find in the application of these perishability clauses that they're not working, they're resulting in elimination of important rights, they're promoting instability, then we have the perishability clauses attached to the perishability clauses themselves so that we can at least experiment with them. And when the time comes, if we say, okay, these have resulted in ultimately negative effects, then we simply vote on whether the perishability clauses should or should not expire. And we'll just say they should expire and they won't continue. So it's just an experiment, and it's not, it's a different idea. It's not really one that I've heard, proposed before. But because to a certain extent, we have this tug between the concept of a constitution which constrains democratic will to promote stability and rights protections, and then and so we have that tug of conflict between these two things, between democracy itself, and we have, antiquated. The idea here is that we have so many antiquated rights protections, so many antiquated statutory edicts and whatnot that have become just outdated. If they have expiration dates, they can just be done away with. We wouldn't have as many conflicts. And it's just more efficient that way. The law remains more applicable and more relevant to modernity. But look, I mean, this is just an idea. I'm not advocating for it necessarily. I'm not engaging in any kind of advocacy for this idea. I'm engaging in suggestion rather than advocacy. It's just an idea, and I hope that it's one that that the audience finds interesting, and I at least did, and hopefully I can continue this series of just kind of working on some of the engineering side of government and trying to figure out different ways that we could make the government better and make the society better off by making the government better. So thank you for watching, and I really hope that you like and subscribe. I would very much appreciate more subscribers. It would motivate me to produce more content, and I just like doing it. So like talking these things out and providing analysis. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.